Happy Tuesday, Year 12. It's really lovely to be coming at at you. That sounds slightly more aggressive than I intended. To be teaching you today. Okay, we are still on paper 2, this overarching theme of gender. We're on remote learning lesson 17, week 11. That's scary, isn't it? It's been 11 weeks that we've been doing this. And hopefully I'll be seeing all of you this Thursday. So a lot of what we'll do on Thursday is going to be a mix of Miss Lockett leading on coursework, support and help, and me kind of being in an advisory position or there to help you as well. And a little bit of just checking in with how you're accessing the remote learning and whether it's actually working as a tool or what we can do to make it better. So please come on Thursday ready with your suggestions and your input, what's working, what isn't. Because really, we are looking to actually cover some ground, okay, using these remote lessons. We are looking to establish knowledge and understanding of concepts relating to gender. Okay, and we're going to go straight into a starter that's really about building and securing that knowledge of the theory and concept we were looking at last week, which is Goodwin. So we've seen this format before. I think it's really helpful to turn our knowledge into topic sentences, okay, that potentially then could be contribute to a paragraph that we could build at a later stage into an essay. So I'm just going to ask you to pause the screen in a minute and to go through and complete as much of these sentences as possible. So Goodwin provides a credible contribution to the discussion because she is. Her method of research included initially working in the 80s, Goodwin's findings may be considered. Through her research, she identified a gender difference around the use of. A little clue there, the word begins with D. D are speech acts that. Goodwin's research suggests that blank use mitigated directives whilst blank use aggravated directives. An example of a mitigated directive is, an example of an aggravated directive is. Inclusive pronouns, inclusive verb forms, and modal auxiliaries are markers of blank directives. Explicit commands, imperatives, and modals of certainty are markers of blank directives. Okay, my darling, so press pause, work through those sentences. Now, ideally, because it's revision, try and do it first of all without your notes from last week. But then if you are hitting a real blank, look back at your notes, okay? Because either way, that is revision, that is a return to information, and it is working to kind of strengthen the link in your memory, okay? So press pause, see you in a minute with the answers. Okay, so these were our topic sentences. We're just going to share some answers. Now, in sharing answers, obviously, we want right answer, to some extent, sometimes a similar answer, okay? Some will be what we call closed answers. There's either it's got one answer. Sometimes there's open answers. So Goodwin provides a credible contribution to the discussion because she is a credible, established professor of anthropology. So when we're looking at whether our theorists are credible, we're looking at their credentials, what they've, how they've established themselves in a professional kind of scientific academic arena. Okay, so we could have said she is an academic, she's an established professor of anthropology, and we could have talked about her longevity, that she's lasted for so long. So there is scope there for choice. Brilliant. So her method of research included field work and observation over 3 years in an LA school. Okay, so again, you might have got a slightly different wording, but we definitely want to know that it's field work, observation, and particularly that first piece of research, that 3 years time frame, is brilliant. Okay, so that methodology one, again, there might be some variation. It's looking for a short summary that it was field work and observation over 3 years in that Los Angeles school. The additional information, obviously, that she was observing these children outside of the presence of a teacher sometimes, so at lunch, at play, and looking at how they interacted. Okay, so initially working in the 80s, Goodwin's findings may be considered outdated. Potentially, we're looking at data that's over 50 years old and therefore no longer relevant within the current landscape. So when we ever look at something and it's historical, we have to think about, is it still contemporary relevant? Okay. Through her research, she identified a gender difference around the use of directives. Now, this is why I like this series, because it really is clearly linked to some illustrated examples. So everything we know about directives, the different types of directives, and the next lot of answers always elevates your mark up. Okay, so directives are speech acts that get someone to do something. Goodwin's research suggests that females use mitigated directives while males use aggravated directives. Now, if we were looking for that challenge, we could say, although she did recognise that in all girl groups or all boy groups, somebody potentially could move outside of what we might call the gender stereotype or the gender classification, um, and see it as something and use language differently. So it wasn't exclusively men and exclusively women using these directives. However, the majority of male interactions and observations that she made, they tended to use aggravated, whilst the majority of females tended to use mitigated. So that was enough evidence to suggest difference. Now, an example of a mitigated directive, that would anything from the doctor. So let us do that together. We could. And the aggravated, so anything like sit down, you're on it, as in the game, you're on it, I must be in charge. So mitigated directives then use inclusive pronouns, inclusive verb forms, and modal auxiliaries, whereas aggravated directives use explicit commands, imperatives, and modals of certainty. So again, a lovely reason that I start early with this theory. And we need Lakoff because she comes at the beginning. So as flawed as she might be, she's the starting point, the kind of the hinge point for our understanding of gender theory, being the first woman to look at this topic seriously. There was a gentleman that looked at gender and language in the 1920s, and he seemingly influenced a lot of Lakoff, but she was the first kind of real recognized credible scientist to kind of, or linguist, sorry, to go down this route. Okay, but Goodwin then comes in line with her, moving away from deficit to difference, but having a really strong set of examples. So just have a look through your answers and make sure they're in line with mine, and then we'll be looking at a new theorist today. Okay, now our third theorist that we're going to be looking at, look at this lovely lady. Now, this always makes me smile because, rightly or wrongly, when we think of some of the photos we've seen of our current theorists, Miss Robin Lakoff and Marjorie Goodwin, they look of women of a certain age and a certain demeanour. And then, boom, we meet Deborah Tannen. Deborah Tannen has a very glamorous headshot. Okay, clearly wearing makeup, having had her hair done, lovely shirt. So she is a different kind of theorist. Now, what I like about Deborah Tannen is she's a theorist who I believe kind of bridges the divide between popular audiences, non-specialist audiences, and academic audiences. In other words, she has academic credibility, but she also branches across to kind of popular culture. So when we look at some of these books and some of the background to her theory today, she kind of represents a theorist who's like a bit of a rock star theorist. Yep, they're incredibly popular in a contemporary kind of setting, in a popular culture setting. You know, she's the sort of theorist that does the talk show circuit. She's the sort of theorist that's going to bridge the gap really between academic circles and popular circles. So who is she? So all these books will give you a clue. Who is she? She is Deborah Tannen, okay, a professor of linguistics at Georgetown University, a best-selling author and speaker. So she's a rare example. And the other one that does it really well, my favourite, David Crystal, of an academic linguistic kind of credible theorist who bridges the gap into the popular culture. So somebody who popular culture reveres, understands, gives airtime to. So she bridges that gap really well. However, that does mean she gets some controversy. Some people think she kind of, you can't do both. So some people think she adapts her findings and is very much reinforcing, maybe perpetuating stereotypes about gender because it's popular with a popular audience. You know, it suits society to think men and women are different. It suits society to think there's a miscommunication between the genders. And some people think she emphasizes that difference to maintain that kind of popular credibility. So a potential challenge then. So we're looking today at Deborah Tannen. So a little clue, although we've got this whole list of books across, or an image of the books across the page, first published, that's not what I meant, in 1987. So she has spanned the decades, the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, and she is still working today. So again, a bit like Marjorie Goodwin, we've got that longevity, okay, strengthening her credibility, the fact that she has lasted. Okay, she's got longevity on her side, but she began seriously making a contribution to gender and our understanding of gender theory and concepts since the late 1980s. Okay, so what did she contribute? Well, really, we put her in that D of difference. So she her contribution reinforced the idea that men and women communicate differently. So she contributes to our understanding of the differences between male and female communication. And what did she do? Well, it says there that she's a university professor, author and speaker. So she's contributed to this story, to this narrative, to this discourse about men and women being different for many years now. So we've got That's Not What I Meant, Talking 9 till 5, You're Wearing What, on communication, talking voices, conversational style, gender and discourse, You're the Only One I Can Tell, You Were Always Mum's Favourite. So she's looked across the whole spectrum of conversational styles, and she made a very significant contribution and a very popular contribution to the concept of difference. Okay, now how did she do it? So we've got a little quote from her here that's going to help us understand the how. I'm a linguist. I study how people talk to each other and how the ways we talk affect our relationships. As a sociolinguist, I want to know how cultural differences affect the way people talk and listen. My research method, inspired by the work of Robin Lakoff and John Gomprez of the University of California at Berkeley, is a sociolinguistic microanalysis. I tape record and transcribe naturally occurring conversations. Okay, so actually, interestingly, she says that she was inspired by Robin Lakoff. So although Robin Lakoff gives us an interpretation of behavior of men and women that suggests women are in a deficit, that their conversation is somehow substandard, lacking in something, somehow weaker, inspired by Lakoff, Tannen began her own sociolinguistic microanalysis, in other words, tape recording and transcribing naturally occurring conversations, and said that men and women are different. So she came to a slightly different conclusion, but based on her interpretation and inspired by Robin Lakoff. So actually, we could go back to our Lakoff notes and, if you like, our Marjorie Goodwin notes, and actually add now this technical term, sociolinguistic microanalysis. Okay, so this is where you tape, record, transcribe naturally occurring conversations. Now, you yourselves, if you are doing your own methodologies, potentially you might be looking at sociolinguistic microanalysis, your tape recording and transcribing naturally occurring conversations. So it can also secure your use of kind of technical language in describing your methodologies. Now, we haven't got anything here to inform our illustrated examples and challenge yet. That's going to come up in a minute. But we can now complete a kind of like a little knowledge card, the who, when, what, and how of Tannen. Now, actually, she makes quite a hefty, weighty contribution. So there is more that she contributes, more of the what that we're going to see, and the how over the next few slides. Okay, so when you're ready, press pause, do your first who, when, what, how. Bearing in mind, we're going to add some illustrated examples and challenges as we go through, and we're potentially going to add more information to our what's and our hows. Okay, so just pause and do that now. Okay, so from one of her books, I'm just going to start to think about some of the what she contributed. So we've got from Talking from 9 till 5, okay, Women and Men at Work. So let's have a little look then. Now, these are just some extracts from the chapter 1, and I've just got over here characteristics of male behavior, characteristics of female behavior. So what did she contribute to our understanding of men and women? Well, she contributed an understanding of difference, but to specifically have illustrated examples, beginning to move towards that, let's see what she says here. So the wage gap could be caused, so there is a could, a modal, she's not being definite, by a communication gap, a discrepancy in understanding of communication styles between men and women. Boys are expected to put themselves forward, emphasize the qualities that make them look good, and de-emphasize those that would show them in a less favorable light. Too much of this is called arrogance. So if we're looking at characteristics of male behavior there, we could write down, put themselves forward, emphasize qualities that make them look good, de-emphasize those that would show them in a less favorable light. And then in brackets, that's often misinterpreted, too much of this is called, is arrogance. Okay, so in a minute, you're going to pause and just make your notes on male behavior, okay, based on this page. Girls are expected to be humble, not to try and take the spotlight, emphasize the ways they're just like everyone else, and de-emphasize ways that they're special. A woman who does this comes off as lacking in confidence. Ironically, those who learn the lesson best are most in danger of falling into traps laid by conversational conventions. So what are the characteristics of female speech here? They're expected to be humble, not to take the spotlight, emphasize the ways they're just like everyone else, de-emphasize ways that they are not special. So in other words, you're not allowed to draw attention to the fact that if you're a woman that you're special or unique. Now, interestingly here, whereas for men they come off as arrogant when they behave the way they've been conditioned to behave, women come off as lacking confidence. Now, she says a woman who does this really well. So, in other words, this is something that women put on. Women present themselves as lacking in confidence as a mask to their confidence. So, just complete those